Richard Lazarus was born on March 3, 1922. He received his undergrad at New York City College and University of Pittsburgh. He served 3 years in the U.S. Army, and he later became a faculty member at the University of California, Berkeley, where he met Suzanne Folkman. She was his student, completing her Ph.D. in educational psychology at the time. She was in New York in 1938, where she and Richard co-wrote the book Stress, Appraisal, and Coping in 1984. Susan went on to become a professor at the University of San Francisco after being convinced by a man who interested her in studying HIV/AIDS. Part of her research focused on caregiving between males during the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s. They were both heavily awarded for their contributions to literature and coping with stress. Their book broke down the idea of an individual's environment, their stressors, and how they are able to cope with them. Coping, as defined by Lazarus and Folkman, is a constant change in cognitive and behavior in order to manage specific stressors. Stressors can be seen as external or internal events or environments that individuals might consider demanding, challenging, and/or threatening to individual safety. It is important to see stress as 3 key points. Number 1, stress is a defense mechanism. Number 2, stress follows the 3 stages of alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. And number 3, if the stress is prolonged or severe enough, it could result in chronic diseases or even death. Lazarus and Folkman introduced stress as a product of transaction between a person, including multiple systems: cognitive, physiological, affective, psychological, and neurological, and his or her or their complex environment. Cognitive is how a person perceives a stressor. Physiological is the body's response to danger, example, fight or flight. Affective refers to emotional responses we feel during the situation. And psychological are factors such as increased heart rate and fast breathing. And lastly, neurological response is the way the brain's neurons communicate with each other during stress. Lazarus was highly influential in signifying the importance of emotion in his theories, when many did not believe they factored into psychology at the time. The core emotions include anger, a demeaning offense to me and mine; fear, facing an immediate, concrete, and overwhelming physical danger; sadness, having experienced an irrevocable loss; disgust, taking in or being too close to an indigestible object or idea. This could also be considered metaphorical. And of course, happiness, making reasonable progress toward the realization of a person's individual goal. The process of which an individual being exposed to a stressor is termed appraisal by Lazarus and Folkman. Primary appraisal does not always take place when the individual is conscious of it, but their own beliefs, morals, background, and sense of humor attribute to how they interpret said stressor. If they determine that the stressor will not affect them in any way, it becomes irrelevant to them, oftentimes lead to being forgotten in total. There is also a stressor that is called benign positive, so it will benefit this person's life in a positive way, such as a promotion at work. Promotions could also be considered stressors, but will affect the person in a positive way. Only when the stressor is determined to be harmful, threatening, or challenging will the person move on to the secondary appraisal stage, where they need to determine how to cope with that issue. Stress is not necessarily an emotion, but a reaction to an outside stimulus. 3 categories of stress include catastrophe, which could mean war in your country, natural disaster, such as tsunamis, floods, and earthquakes, terrorism, and fathom. Significant life changes, marriage, having a child, moving to a new home, divorce, and death of a loved one. And there are everyday inconveniences, like sitting in traffic, having a fight with a loved one or a sibling or a friend, getting to work late, and etc. Regardless of the size of the stressor, your body can be triggered to go into a fight or flight response, which releases hormones called adrenaline and cortisol, which give your body the ability to do what it is told to do in order to survive. Short-term stress can provide energy and focus, but long-term stress can lead to chronic illness and mental health problems. Short-term stress can provide energy to get a job or an exam or a project finished. Lazarus and Folkman claim that the individual uses a problem-focused or emotion-focused response in order to cope with their problem. A problem-focused response deals with changing or altering the stressor entirely. An emotion-focused response is changing your relation to the problem. Problem focus can be seen as acting on what steps can be taken next, asking for assistance or help, and educating yourself on the situation. Emotion focus could be changing your perspective to see the positives in the situation, talking out your emotions with the professional, or sometimes when those options are not available to a person, an individual will withdraw and oftentimes detach from these emotions, though obvious avoidance of a stressor can be very harmful in the long run. According to Lazarus and Folkman, if the individual does not believe he or she or they has the capacity to respond to the challenge, or feels a lack of control, he or she or they is most likely to turn to an emotion-focused coping response. And if the person has the resources to manage the challenge, he or she or they will usually develop a problem-focused coping response. When the individual has gone through the secondary appraisal process and has accepted and therefore integrated the stressor into their lives, they are said to be coping or reappraising. An example of this would be an individual who is incarcerated. This individual is facing stressors all day and night because of their lack of control and freedom over their lives. These stressors can include physical danger, psychological stressors, and overall neurological changes in their brain due to a new environment. But they eventually integrate these everyday stressors into their lives and learn to cope with them. Types of coping include cognitive. So this could be therapy, hobbies, meditation, mindfulness, reading, planning, and time management. A physical type of coping would include yoga, art, deep breathing, medication, relaxation, exercise, and also meditation. Environmental coping can include music, nature, animals, and radical self-care. This could be resting when you require it, even going to spas, sitting out in nature, being with animals, even sunbathing. And other types of coping can include prayer or spirituality, attending church or events centered around the belief in a higher power. There are some weaknesses, though, of the transactional model Lazarus and Folkman created, and some are that individuals can experience a stress response without actually thinking about the situation or event that caused them the stressor. So this means a person is not aware of what triggered them. The primary and secondary appraisals can take place simultaneously, which means they are very difficult to isolate in a study. But of course, we all come from varying backgrounds and live with different circumstances, so each person's appraisal of a stressor will vary. For example, a child's parents divorcing could lead to a feeling of devastation and loss, but for another child, it could be a welcoming change that will result in a healthier living situation. These again are determined by the individual's backgrounds, resources, and overall support. This includes cultural and financial status, access to education and research, and of course, the support system you have around you. I'm going to use the example of divorce to further explain the concept of stress and coping using Lazarus and Folkman's theory. Divorce in childhood may result in negative outcomes in terms of behavior, emotion, self-esteem, social relations, academic achievement, and psychosomatic disorders. The most important institution outside the home that can provide support for children is their school, potentially making it a very critical domain for counseling, therapy, and intervention if they're having difficulties adjusting to this new stressor. After the first year, a child appears to be bouncing back, but not necessarily back to normal after their parents' divorce. They get used to the changes in their daily routines and they grow comfortable with their new living arrangements. Changing schools, moving to a new home, or going back and forth between houses and living with a single parent with less consistency are just a few of additional stressors that make divorce difficult, not necessarily divorce itself. During my research, I found a study on what children expect from their parents while they are going through a divorce. The study further found that these children express a desire to have input on matters pertaining to themselves and the need for co-parenting and equal time with both parents. All these factors were found to have been a significant assistance to aid children in coping with parental divorce. Kids who doubt their ability to deal with the changes and see themselves as victims of the situation are more likely to experience mental health problems later in life. Art therapy, a type of physical coping device, has been a great way for children of divorce or children suffering with any other stressor to express and articulate their emotions. Art can create a voice for young children who are not yet able to communicate what it is they are feeling, and for children who need art to create an outlet for their emotions. Creating art on their own also gives them a sense of new autonomy and gives them the chance to make their own choices. This gives children back a sense of control they are lacking when so much of their lives have changed due to divorce. Finishing an art project and developing art-related skills give children the experience of seeing themselves push through difficult things and coming out of it with something positive. In a journal about art therapy, author Courtney McCullough observed a young child whose parents were legally separated and has also been subjected to his parents' domestic abuse. He began art therapy at a community center and would be asked to create artwork by his therapist. He also often drew racing cars and figurines fighting each other, which led the therapist to believe that the incorporation of fight-or-flight scenarios in his drawings stemmed from his turmoil at home. He also used clay to act out physically abusive scenes between his family members and got to navigate the situation in a healthier way. The art process also validated his feelings by providing him with opportunities for reflection and empathic understanding of a situation. He eventually asked to take his artwork home with him as he gained a sense of pride in what he had created. Over time, he was able to use art as a means of channeling these challenging and oftentimes threatening stressors into something positive for his self-esteem and overall emotional health. Though Lazarus and Folkman created their theory of coping and stress decades ago, their research has been highly influential on how we use coping skills today to deal with our stressors.